You might have heard of macro and microevolution, but I bet you've never heard about the evolution of cock decorations. And no, I'm not talking about dressing up your favorite chicken. I'm referring to the various loincloths that have restrained and protected your pinball wizards from wobbling aimlessly. Interestingly, these undergarments have come in all shapes and sizes. From the 6-foot-long rock-ushaku of ancient Japan to the ballsack of medieval Europe, loincloths range from the ridiculous to the downright bizarre. So let's go through them, shall we? First up are the ancient Egyptians. Several artworks from ancient Egypt depict men in varying loincloths. Initially, it was made of a narrow band on which a light cloth was hung and tied across the waist. Now, I don't know if these loincloths were transparent, but I'm certain they outlined the prized assets, which of course would give the maidens a fair idea of what was underneath the hood, so to speak. I can imagine maidens giggling as men pass by, only to gather together later in the evening and compare the outlines of the pocket rockets they've seen all day. Maybe this embarrassed the men, so they decided to cover up. Thus, by 3000 BCE, they were using several wraps of woven materials tied in front of their Johnsons to hide both their contour and size. Known as shinty, the front side of the loincloth was often pleated or stiffened to protect the front. Other men preferred intricate designs in the front to disguise the contours of their assets. As expected, the maidens were disappointed. Wealthy Egyptians and members of the royal household used expensive materials, such as luxury Egyptian linen, to make their loincloths, while the poor used cheap linens. However, regardless of social status, the ancient Egyptian loincloths couldn't prevent their, joysticks from pendulating to and fro like a metronome at a chicken dance party. Laborers, messengers, and servants were the most affected, as their tools dangled helplessly, slapping their thighs at the least movement. The Romans probably knew this, and thus they designed the subligaculum, an underwear worn under their togas, or sometimes alone as a bathing suit. It was similar to the Egyptian loincloth, but with a slight twist. Instead of just hanging it in front of their members, the subligaculum was passed from the front between the thighs and tied to strings at the back. This way, they didn't flap helplessly during activities. The subligaculum was an ever-present staple at public baths, where all men and women, regardless of size, status, and physique, adorned themselves in its glory. It was standard attire for gladiators too, but theirs were thinner, emphasizing the physique of their lower regions, if you know what I mean. The subligaculum left much to the imagination, but the kynodesme of the ancient Greeks allowed them to feast their eyes on members in their full glory, except the head. The kynodesme, which appropriately translates to dog leash, was a strap or cord used to tie the foreskin on top of the male erectus, hiding the head from prying eyes. The tied foreskin was then secured against a strap around the waist to keep the Johnson from wiggling like an excited dog's tail. Hence its name, dog leash. You see, the ancient Greeks believed that publicly displaying the male member's head was offensive, immodest, and degrading, but they could care less if their lower half hung loose. The rule was simple. Whatever you did, the head shouldn't be seen in public. So they invented the kynodesme. Initially, the kynodesme was designed for athletes who often competed in the nude, but the public eventually caught on and it became fashionable. But I'm curious. Between the kynodesme and the subligaculum, which one would you prefer if you lived in ancient Rome? If you're a kynodesme fan, hit the like button. If you love the subligaculum, then comment below. Now, back to the video. Though famous for their ferocity, brutality, and savagery, the Vikings took great care of themselves, which included their privates. The men wore loincloths made of soft wool or linen designed to protect and keep them warm. The exact nature of their loincloths is subject to debate, but most scholars think that they resembled the Roman subligaculum. Others also suspect the design was just a simple rectangular cloth hung around the genitalia, much like the undergarments of ancient Egypt. Unlike the Egyptians, Romans, and Greeks, the Vikings' loincloths were primarily purposed to keep their junk warm, especially during extremely cold winter months. Imagine waking up and being frozen down there in the morning just because you forgot to wear your loincloths the night before. This gives a whole new meaning to the term frozen stiff. What would you do? Warm them on a hot stone, perhaps? I'd love to read your answers in the comments section. In medieval Europe, men wore underwear similar to that of ancient Egypt, but without the string. It was a piece of cloth that they just wrapped around their waist underneath their outer garments. The loincloth didn't have any peculiar name, but it was mostly worn by laborers who were doing intense work. As the years flew by, loose underpants called braies were introduced. The braies varied in length from the upper thigh to below the knee and could be closed with a drawstring at the waist or clinched with a separate belt around which the top of the garment would be tucked. Some men, especially those who worked in the sun, preferred to wear only the braies, also known as breeches, as the main outer garment. It was usually made of fine wool or linen, which explains the off-white color we often see in paintings from the period. However, the braies had a problem. They just couldn't control the hapless movements of the privates, which made them very uncomfortable. The medievalists had to come up with a new design that would keep their trouser snakes under control, and that was how codpieces were born. A codpiece was a small bag, or a flexible receptacle attached to the breeches. You can call it the ball sack if you like, because that's exactly what it was. All you had to do was place yourself in the codpiece while you were dressing, and then you were good to go. No more dangling. But the codpieces played a funny trick on women. Due to its design, the codpiece exaggerated the size of the one-eyed monsters, making them look bigger than they really were. Interestingly, men with smaller willies had their tailors design bigger codpieces to attract the pretty maidens. And it worked. Unfortunately for the women, they found out it was all a ruse after they joined the men in the other room. Now, for the men who were poor and could not afford a codpiece, they often resorted to using a potato. While this didn't provide comfort for the men, it certainly did attract the gaze of the ladies. However, gentlemen, remember the golden rule. Make certain it doesn't slip and end up behind you. Otherwise, you'll be scaring everyone away. With all this talk of loincloths and codpieces, I could make a whole video on the most bizarre women's undies in history. Just write the magic words, "I'm interested," and your wish is my command. Meanwhile, the Japanese had their very own variation of the codpiece known as the fundoshi. Unlike its European counterpart, the fundoshi was worn around the waist, usually passed between the legs and tied or knotted at the back. The fundoshi came in 5 variations, with the most common being the rakushaku, which was often 6 feet long. Sadly, that's a whole foot taller than I am. Yikes. Culturally, the Japanese assigned 2 main idioms to the fundoshi, demonstrating their view on underwear. Fundashi o shimite kokurou, meaning to get ready for some hard work. Now, before your mind falls into the gutter, hard work means literal manual labor, not the one done in the other room. The other idiom, tanen no fudoshi, cautions against using tools belonging to someone else. It encourages men to use their literal, not metaphorical tools, and even if they do use someone's tools, they must do so with caution. The Chinese had similar loincloths that were tied around the waist and passed through the legs. They were of different types, but the most popular was the liandang, a crotchless underpants that only covered the privates, allowing them to dangle freely. The briefs were made from many fibers, including cotton, silk, and hemp, depending on the social status of the man. As the 19th century wore on, Europeans began to shift from wearing loose braies to tighter-fitting trousers. As they colonized the known world, they introduced their latest invention. Soon, several cultures across the globe abandoned their traditional underwear and pants, clinging to European briefs that have become more common today. Do you know another thing modern cultures have abandoned? Their unique New Year celebrations. Fortunately, we've compiled some of the most exciting ancient New Year celebrations, so click on this video, and I'll see you there. And until next time, thanks ever so much for watching.